March 16, 1968, Sun Mai Village, Quang Ngai Province, South Vietnam. The morning began with the faint shimmer of heat rising over the paddies. Mist clung low to the grass, and the air smelled of wet earth and cooking rice. Somewhere beyond the hamlet, a rooster crowed the last sound of ordinary life before the helicopters came. At 7:30 a.m., the thudding rotors of UH-1 Hueys broke the silence. The villagers, mostly women, children, and the elderly, stepped out of their huts and looked up, shielding their eyes from the downdraft. They didn't know these were men from Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, 11th Brigade, Americal Division led by Lieutenant William L. Calley Jr. The soldiers landed in the fields east of the hamlet known as My Lai 4. They were young, most under 22, mud already clinging to their boots as they fanned out. Their mission, as they had been briefed, was to enter the village and root out Viet Cong fighters believed to be hiding there. But what awaited them were not armed men, only farmers, women with infants strapped to their backs, children running barefoot. Nguyen Thi Tao, age 32, was boiling water over a clay stove when the first gunshots cracked through the still air. She thought they were firing warning shots, the kind villagers had grown used to. Then she saw her neighbor, old Mr. Jang, collapse face first in the dust, a crimson spray marking his fall. The platoon swept through the village with M16s raised. They shot them like it was nothing. A soldier would later testify. We were told there were Viet Cong, but there were only people. At 8:00 a.m., the first cluster of villagers was rounded up near a drainage ditch. Over 100 unarmed men, women, and children sat in the dirt, guarded by soldiers from Calley's platoon. Many clasped their hands, whispering prayers. Calley barked orders. The interpreter, Pham Than Cong, a boy from the region, tried to tell him these were civilians. Calley ignored him. "Kill them," he said. The words were quiet, mechanical, like an order repeated too many times to carry meaning. Private Paul Meadlow hesitated. "Are you sure?" Calley looked at him, eyes flat beneath the helmet. "You heard me?" The gunfire came in waves, short bursts, then sustained automatic fire. Bodies tumbled into the ditch. Meadlow would later recall the sound of children crying as he reloaded. One boy, no older than 5, clung to his mother's skirt. A bullet tore through them both. The ground became slick. Steam rose from the soil as the morning sun climbed higher, somewhere. An American radio crackled, "Area secure." By 9:00 a.m., My Lai was no longer a village. It was a landscape of smoke, screams, and the smell of burned straw. Huts were set ablaze with Zippo lighters. Livestock were gunned down. Soldiers laughed nervously, their hands trembling. One man, Specialist 4 Dennis Conti, vomited and refused to continue. Others kept shooting. In the chaos, a helicopter circled low overhead. Inside was Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson Jr., piloting an OH-23 Scout helicopter with his crew, Glenn Andriotta and Lawrence Colburn. They watched as soldiers executed villagers. From above, Thompson saw what looked like a massacre, not combat. He brought the helicopter down near a ditch where bodies piled high. Some still moved. He stepped out, walked up to Calley, and shouted over the engine noise, "There's people down there. These are civilians." Calley's response was cold. "This is my business." Thompson returned to his helicopter and told his crew, "If they open fire again, we fire back." It was the first recorded moment in which soldiers threatened to shoot their own to protect Vietnamese civilians. He marked the location for evacuation, called in medics, and airlifted a few survivors, a woman and 2 children, out of the village. Below them, gunfire continued. As the morning bled into noon, the bodies in the ditch began to swell in the sun. The sound of insects filled the air where moments ago there had been screams. The soldiers regrouped by 11:00 am, their uniforms stained, their silence heavy. Someone lit another hut. The flame caught fast, curling black smoke into the sky. The villagers who survived hid in ditches or beneath piles of straw, praying not to cough, not to move. They would later tell investigators they saw children shot while begging for water. An old woman clutching a prayer book was executed while reciting Buddhist chants. By midday, over 500 civilians were dead. The soldiers boarded their helicopters and left behind a smoldering graveyard. The sky above My Lai was clear again. Too clear. No one would speak of it that day. No official report would mention civilians. And no one outside Quang Ngai would know what had happened. Not yet. By the afternoon of March 16, 1968, the sun was blinding over the rice paddies of Sơn Mỹ. Smoke still coiled from the ashes of what had once been My Lai 4. The bodies, men, women, infants lay scattered among the burned huts. The stench of blood and charred straw clung to the wind. Captain Ernest Medina, commanding officer of Charlie Company, stood near the edge of the village. His face was unreadable. The lines of exhaustion and disbelief masked behind the reflex discipline of war. Lieutenant Callie approached him. Boots slick with mud and something darker. "Mission accomplished, sir," Callie said simply. Medina didn't ask how. He didn't have to. The silence between them carried its own weight, a silence too thick to break, too dangerous to name. The men returned to base at LZ Dotty by late afternoon. Their rifles were cleaned, the helicopters refueled. Officially, the after-action report stated 128 Viet Cong killed in a search and destroy operation. No civilian casualties. It was filed without hesitation, signed, and stamped. But beneath the clinical language, the soldiers' minds were unraveling. Private Paul Meadlow, hands still trembling, sat apart from the others, staring at the dirt. He would later recall that night. "I couldn't eat. I couldn't even close my eyes. Every time I did, I saw their faces. He wasn't alone. Others drank until they couldn't think. The laughter that followed was hollow, jagged a defense against the images that wouldn't leave them. Back in My Lai, the survivors crept from hiding as night fell. They lit small fires for their dead. Nguyen Thi Tao found her sister's body near the well, clutching a cooking pot. Children searched the ruins for their parents. The villagers dug shallow graves with their bare hands, whispering prayers into the dark. For them, the war had not just taken lives, it had erased meaning. For the next few days, Charlie Company continued their operations as if nothing had happened. Reports went up the chain of command, each one repeating the same fiction: Viet Cong engagement, enemy losses high, mission success. No questions were asked. But the truth could not stay buried. A few men had seen too much, and silence, even in the heart of war, began to crack. Hugh Thompson and his crew filed a formal report to their superiors the same day, describing the mass murder of civilians. It went nowhere. A colonel read it, frowned, and placed it in a folder marked Pending Review. In April, when the Division Inspector General conducted a cursory investigation, witnesses were briefed before interviews. Soldiers were told, "You were under fire." The villagers were VC. The phrase spread like camouflage, a lie polished into official truth. For over a year, the Army's narrative held. My Lai disappeared beneath statistics, maps, and redacted lines in field reports. Those who spoke up were quietly reassigned or ignored. Then, in November 1969, the silence broke. Ron Ridenour, a former soldier who had heard fragments of the atrocity from men who were there, began to write letters. One to the Pentagon, one to Congress, one to President Nixon. He described, in restrained, factual detail, the slaughter of an entire village. He attached names, dates, units. It was a risk soldiers didn't accuse other soldiers. But he wrote anyway. I remain irrevocably convinced that this matter should be brought to light and thoroughly investigated. His letter reached the office of General William Pierce. An internal inquiry was launched, quiet at first, then unstoppable. What they found would unravel the myth of moral war America had told itself. In late 1969, journalist Seymour Hersh received a tip. A lieutenant named William Calley was under house arrest at Fort Benning, Georgia, charged with the murder of civilians. Hersh tracked him down. The story ran on November 12, 1969, in newspapers across the United States. The world finally saw what had been buried. Photographs surfaced the work of Army photographer Ronald L. Haberle, who had documented the massacre with his Nikon camera. Black and white images of women and children lying in ditches, bodies tangled in the dirt. The headline read simply, "My Lai, an American atrocity." The reaction was immediate disbelief, then outrage. The Pentagon denied, politicians evaded, generals shifted blame, but the images could not be unseen. The truth had a texture, a smell, a face. Calley was charged with the premeditated murder of 109 civilians. His defense: "I was following orders." The phrase would echo through history, from Nuremberg to Quang Ngai. Meanwhile, in Vietnam, the graves in My Lai remained shallow. The survivors rebuilt what they could: bamboo huts on scorched ground. Each year, they gathered quietly by the ditch to light incense. The world had finally watched, but it had watched in silence for too long. Fort Benning, Georgia, November 1970. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and cigarette smoke, the kind of stale stillness that comes when history is being rewritten in real time. Lieutenant William L. Calley Jr., 27 years old, sat rigid in his uniform, eyes forward. Around him, the machinery of military justice ground into motion. He was the only man formally charged for the killing of more than 500 civilians at My Lai. The press filled every bench. Photographers adjusted their lenses. Court reporters poised their pens. Outside, protesters carried signs that read, "Free Calley, he did his duty." My Lai was war, not murder. The contradictions of a divided America hung in the air. Inside the courtroom, witness after witness took the stand. Some were soldiers from Charlie Company, their voices unsteady, their memories raw. Private Paul Meadlow, pale and visibly shaken, was asked to recount what happened by prosecutor Captain Aubrey Daniel. He hesitated. "We was told to kill them," he said softly. "And we did. I fired. Sir, I fired till I ran out of ammo." "And who gave you that order?" Daniel asked. Meadlow looked down. "Lieutenant Calley." The courtroom fell silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Calley's defense attorney, George Latimer, argued that his client was a scapegoat, a young officer caught in the moral fog of war, obeying commands from above. "My client believed he was following lawful orders," Latimer said. "He did what his training demanded." The prosecution countered with photographs, Ronald Haberle's images projected onto a screen. Children face down in the ditch, women shot in their homes, elderly men with their hands still clasped in prayer. One image in particular froze the room: a small child, barefoot, standing amidst bodies, eyes staring directly into the lens. For several seconds, no one spoke. Calley was asked if he recognized the scene. He nodded. Yes. That's where I told my men to fire. Why? He paused, voice flat. Because I was ordered to. Because that's what we were there to do. The trial lasted 4 months. Each day peeled back another layer of collective denial, the chain of command, the culture of dehumanization, the casual brutality of a war that blurred every line between combatant and civilian. The name My Lai was now synonymous with shame. When the verdict came on March 29, 1971, the jury found Callie guilty of premeditated murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment at hard labor, but the sentence lasted only 3 days. President Richard Nixon quietly intervened, ordering Callie released from the stockade and placed under house arrest. Public opinion had turned fiercely in his favor. Half the nation saw him not as a killer, but as a soldier betrayed by his leaders. Thousands sent letters of support in bars, factories, and college campuses. People said he was doing his job. Vietnamese survivors, thousands of miles away, never heard those words. For them, the trial was not justice. It was theater. In Sơn Mỹ, the graves remained unmarked. Each year, new bones surfaced after heavy rains. Mothers wept silently as they tended to the site. There was no anger left, only fatigue, the kind that seeps into generations. In Washington, internal documents began to leak, the Pierce report, detailing systematic failures from Division Command to the Pentagon itself. The report concluded, between March 16 and 18, 1968, American troops committed a massacre. Senior officers sought to suppress the truth. Responsibility is not limited to the field, but only Callie bore the punishment. Others, Medina, Coster, Henderson, were cleared or quietly reassigned. Callie himself spoke publicly for the first time in 1971 at a luncheon in Columbus, Georgia. "There is not a day I do not feel remorse for what happened," he said. "I feel sorry for the Vietnamese. I feel sorry for my fellow soldiers. I feel sorry for myself." He paused, then added, almost whispering, "But you can't take the war out of a man once you put it in." For the survivors, the war never left. Nguyen Thi Thao, the woman who had lost her sister that morning, would later testify to a visiting journalist in 1972. She said, "They came from the sky, like gods. And when they left, there was no sky anymore, only smoke." In the years that followed, the name My Lai would appear in textbooks, news archives, documentaries. But for those who lived it, it wasn't history. It was memory heavy, buried, but never gone. By the end of the 1970s, the village had rebuilt. A memorial stood over the ditch, carved in stone, with a single inscription, "No more My Lai." Sơn Mỹ, Quang Ngai Province, March 16, 1998, 30 years to the day. The sun rose slowly over the green paddies, washing the memorial stones in pale gold. Incense smoke curled upward in thin spirals, dissolving into the quiet air. A line of villagers, many in white mourning scarves, moved silently along the path to the ditch, the same ditch where hundreds had fallen. They came with offerings of rice, fruit, and chrysanthemums. Some were survivors. Most were children and grandchildren of the dead. Nguyen Thi Thao, now 62, walked slowly with a cane. Her eyes had faded, but she still remembered the sound, the deafening bursts of gunfire, the screams, the sudden silence afterward. Every March, she came back to this place to speak to them. She said, "Because they still live here, under the soil." The memorial grounds were immaculate white gravel paths, a reflecting pool, a sculpture of a mother holding a child. Tour buses arrived from Da Nang and Saigon, carrying visitors who whispered and took photographs. For them, My Lai was a lesson. For the villagers, it was a wound that never healed. That morning, a small delegation of American veterans arrived. Among them was Lawrence Colburn, the helicopter gunner who, 30 years earlier, had aimed his weapon not at Vietnamese villagers, but at American soldiers to stop the killing. He stood quietly before the memorial, holding a wreath of white lilies. Next to him was Hugh Thompson Jr., older now. His posture slightly stooped. When the crowd stepped aside, he laid the wreath at the foot of the stone and said softly, "We came here to say we're sorry and to promise never again." The Vietnamese elders bowed their heads. Some wept without sound. Others simply stood, watching the foreign men who had once flown above their village, now kneeling in the dirt. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement, the rare kind that comes not from politics, but from the shared weight of memory. In America, the memory of My Lai had taken a different shape. In classrooms, it was a case study in ethics. In newspapers, it was a symbol of moral failure. For veterans, it became a ghost that hovered behind every conversation about Vietnam, the line between duty and atrocity, between obedience and conscience. By the 1990s, government archives were declassified. The Piers report became public. Its pages, stamped top secret 3 decades earlier, revealed the full scope of the cover-up, falsified body counts, destroyed evidence, intimidation of witnesses, and an unspoken agreement among commanders that what happened in My Lai stays in My Lai. The American public read the documents with a mix of horror and resignation. Many had grown up hearing fragments of the story, but the full truth, laid bare in military prose, stripped away the comfort of ignorance. This was not the fog of war. The report read, it was the abandonment of humanity. Callie, who had long since been released, lived quietly in Georgia. For decades, he refused interviews. Then, in 2009 at a Kiwanis Club meeting in Columbus, he spoke again. "There is not a day that goes by that I do not feel remorse for what happened at My Lai," he said. "I wish I could do something about it. I'm sorry." His voice broke. Some applauded. Others looked away. But apologies could not bring back the children buried in the ditch. They could not restore the lives lost or the trust broken. Back in Vietnam, the museum at Sun My expanded. Inside, behind glass, were photographs taken by Ronald Haberle, those same black and white images that had shocked the world in 1969. Visitors often stopped before one in particular, a young woman sprawled beside her baby, one arm outstretched, as if shielding it. The caption read only, "Me va con 16 Tang 3 1968, Mother and Child March 16 1968. Every few minutes, the guide's voice echoed through the halls, calm and factual. This was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern during the Vietnam War. A war where the line between soldier and civilian was erased. The world had moved on, but memory had not. Because My Lai was more than an event, it was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when obedience silences conscience, when fear becomes policy, when humanity collapses under the weight of command. The grass around the ditch grows thick now. Dragonflies hover over the water. Children play nearby, their laughter soft, innocent, unaware. For a moment, it almost feels like life reclaimed what war had stolen. But as dusk falls, the shadows lengthen across the field, and the land remembers. It always remembers. Washington, D.C., spring 1972. Long before the memorial in Quang Nguyen was ever built, the name My Lai had already transformed into a question that no nation wanted to answer. In the marble corridors of the Pentagon, it was whispered a symbol of something too shameful to confront directly. In classrooms, professors debated whether it was an anomaly or an inevitability. In the streets, protesters carried signs that said, "Who is the enemy now?" The war dragged on for 3 more years. And while bombs continued to fall across Indochina, the images of that single Vietnamese hamlet never faded. Black and white photographs circulated in every American city in newspapers, magazines, and campus walls. They became a moral indictment, a wound that words like collateral damage could no longer disguise. In April 1971, a group of veterans calling themselves the Winter Soldiers testified before the U.S. Senate about atrocities they had witnessed or participated in. Some mentioned My Lai directly. Others described villages that never made it into reports, burned to ash under orders, their names forgotten. One veteran said quietly, "My Lai wasn't an exception. It was just the one that got photographed." Their words struck deeper than any headline. For the first time, America began to see that the massacre was not a single failure of command, but the logical consequence of a war that had lost its moral compass. Across the Pacific, the survivors of My Lai lived in silence. Reconstruction was slow. The soil was still toxic, seeded with unexploded ordnance. Children grew up playing in the shadows of burned banyan trees. Some families left. Others stayed bound to the land by memory and by the bones still buried beneath it. In 1974, a Vietnamese film crew arrived to document what remained. They interviewed women who had lost everything, men who still carried shrapnel in their bodies, children who pointed at the ground when asked where their parents were. Their footage was stark, unsentimental, just faces and silence. When it aired on state television, the narrator said one line that would later be inscribed at the memorial. Here, humanity was measured and found wanting. By the late 1970s, the United States began to reckon, cautiously, with the legacy of My Lai. Military academies studied it as a lesson in command ethics. The Pentagon issued new field manuals emphasizing non-combatant protection. But these institutional reforms came quietly, wrapped in bureaucracy as if morality could be codified into procedure. For the veterans who had been there, no document could erase the memory. Some, like Meadlow, withdrew from public life. Others, haunted by nightmares, sought solace in confession. A few never spoke again. Meanwhile, in 1989, the first American delegation of war veterans visited Sơn Mỹ. Among them were soldiers who had served in the same division as Cali. They walked the memorial grounds in silence. One of them, a man named George Blackwell, knelt by the ditch and whispered through tears. We were told it was victory, but this was defeat. He left behind his dog tags, a small, rusted piece of metal hanging from a bamboo branch. They still hang there today. In the years that followed, My Lai became more than a historical footnote. It became a moral compass, fragile, uneasy, and still contested. Filmmakers, writers, and historians revisited the event again and again, each time peeling back another layer of denial. Students studied the photographs in ethics classes. Military officers cited it in lectures on rules of engagement, and yet, the essential question remained, how does an army or a nation lose its sense of humanity so completely? No answer ever felt sufficient. By 2000, the site at Sơn Mỹ had become a place of pilgrimage, not just for Vietnamese, but for visitors from across the world. The grass was neatly trimmed, the stone paths lined with white flowers. In the museum, Visitors moved slowly past glass cases filled with fragments, burned cooking pots, torn shirts, children's shoes. Every March 16th, the memorial bell tolled 504 times once for each life lost. Each ring hung in the air like breath, fading, then returning in echo. In the end, what remained was not politics, nor justice, nor vengeance. What remained was memory, heavy, relentless, and necessary. For the survivors, it was the proof that their suffering had been seen. For the soldiers, it was the shadow they could never outrun. For the world, it was a warning that morality is fragile, and silence is complicity. Because My Lai was not only a village, it was a mirror. And when the world finally looked into it, what it saw was itself, the numbers, and the names. Between March 16 and 18, 1968, 504 Vietnamese civilians were killed in the hamlets of My Lai and My Kay. Among them, 182 women, 17 of whom were pregnant, 173 children, including 56 infants, 60 elderly men over the age of 60. Only one American soldier, Lieutenant William Calley, was convicted. He served 3.5 years under house arrest. No senior officers faced prison. No reparations were paid directly to survivors. The U.S. Army's own Peers Inquiry report documented a cover-up that reached through every level of command. Its conclusion read, "Leadership failed at every level." 50 years later, the grass has grown thick over the ditch. The air smells of lemongrass and incense. Children visit on field trips, their teachers explaining that war is not only fought with weapons, but with choices. Every March 16th at dawn, villagers still gather to light incense and place small paper lotus flowers on the water. Each flower carries a name, written carefully in Vietnamese script, fading as it drifts away. And in that quiet moment before the sun rises fully, the earth seems to hold its breath. The echoes return, and the world remembers what it once tried to forget.